In the swirling currents of global trade and diplomacy, few relationships command as much attention today as that between India and the United States. Both nations, vast, populous, and influential, have spent decades cultivating a partnership built on mutual interests, economic cooperation, democratic values, and a shared vision for a stable, prosperous Indo-Pacific. Yet, as with all great alliances, moments of tension and surprise are inevitable. In August 2025, the world witnessed just such a moment, a single calculated move from India that sent shockwaves through the corridors of power in Washington, D.C., and reverberated across global markets. The immediate context was one of rising friction. The United States, concerned about India's continued purchases of Russian oil amid the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, decided to escalate matters. In a move that stunned many, Washington imposed sweeping tariffs, an eye-watering 50% duty, on a swath of Indian imports. This was no minor measure. The new tariffs targeted approximately 55% of India's $87 billion annual merchandise exports to the U.S., including critical sectors like garments, footwear, gemstones, and chemicals. In practical terms, nearly $48.2 billion worth of exports were suddenly at risk of becoming commercially unviable. For many observers, this appeared to be a significant blow. After all, the United States stands as India's single largest export market. The immediate concern in New Delhi was palpable. How would Indian businesses, millions of workers, and the broader economy absorb such a shock? Would this mark a turning point in the relationship, tipping it into a period of prolonged antagonism? Yet, what happened next defied expectations. Rather than retreat or lash out in kind, India orchestrated a response that was as strategic as it was swift. The government convened emergency meetings with business leaders and trade experts. Instead of focusing solely on the punitive measures, Indian policymakers embraced a multi-pronged approach aimed at blunting the economic impact and, crucially, turning adversity into opportunity. The first element of India's move was diversification. Recognizing the dangers of overdependence on a single export market, Indian officials began working closely with exporters to redirect shipments toward other countries. This was not merely a rhetorical gesture. Leveraging a network of newly inked and existing trade agreements with the United Kingdom, Australia, the United Arab Emirates, and several Southeast Asian partners, India opened fresh channels for its textiles, gems, chemicals, and other products. The machinery of commerce was set in motion. Trade delegations fanned out across capitals, new contracts were negotiated, and logistical pathways were remapped. Simultaneously, India announced a set of targeted financial assistance packages for businesses most exposed to the fallout. These included soft loans, tax breaks, and expedited refunds of export duties. The aim was clear: to ensure that companies could weather the transition period without resorting to mass layoffs or shuttering operations. In the garment hubs of Tirupur, the diamond workshops of Surat, and the chemical factories of Gujarat, the message was one of resilience. Government and industry would stand together. But perhaps the most striking aspect of India's response was its willingness to rethink its own trade policies. For years, critics had accused India of being overly protectionist, shielding domestic industries behind high tariffs and complex regulations. Now, confronted with the specter of lost market share, officials signaled a readiness to embrace a more open, outward-looking posture. Economists within and outside the government advocated for reducing trade barriers, streamlining export procedures, and even allowing a gradual depreciation of the rupee. Such moves, they argued, would make Indian goods more competitive globally, helping offset the immediate losses in the U.S. market. The effects of these measures were not merely theoretical. Within weeks, initial data showed a sharp uptick in Indian exports to the UAE and the United Kingdom, especially in high-value textiles and jewelry. Australian buyers, enticed by new trade incentives, placed record orders for Indian chemicals and footwear. Even as shipments to the U.S. slowed, warehouses and ports across India buzzed with activity, rerouting goods to new destinations. Beyond the economic calculus, however, India's move sent a potent diplomatic signal. By refusing to escalate the dispute or resort to tit-for-tat tariffs, New Delhi underscored its commitment to responsible, rules-based trade. At the same time, the government made it clear that India would not be cowed into abandoning its strategic interests, especially its energy security, which depended in part on affordable Russian oil. This careful balancing act earned India respect from a range of global actors, many of whom face similar dilemmas in navigating the competing pressures of great power politics. For the United States, India's response proved unexpectedly challenging. The tariffs, designed in part to pressure New Delhi into shifting its stance on Russia, instead prompted a wave of sympathy for India among other emerging economies. At the same time, American companies reliant on Indian imports, retailers, jewelers, and manufacturers, began lobbying Congress and the White House to reconsider the measures, warning of higher costs and supply chain disruptions. The realization dawned that the interconnectedness of the modern economy makes unilateral action a risky proposition, especially when dealing with a partner as large and dynamic as India. Perhaps most importantly, India's deft handling of the crisis reaffirmed its growing status as a pivotal player on the world stage. No longer a passive recipient of global trends, India demonstrated its capacity to adapt, innovate, and lead. The episode galvanized domestic debates about the need for greater economic agility, investment in value-added manufacturing, and the importance of cultivating diverse trade relationships. International analysts took note. In economic forums and think tank reports, India was lauded for its resilience and strategic foresight. The shock of the U.S. tariffs, rather than plunging the country into crisis, became a catalyst for reform and renewal. The government's efforts to cushion the blow, while simultaneously using the moment to push for deeper integration into global markets, were seen as a template for other nations navigating the uncertainties of a turbulent world. Of course, challenges remained. The abrupt disruption to nearly half of India's exports to the United States could not be entirely offset overnight. Some sectors, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises with limited capacity to pivot, faced tough months ahead. Workers in export-dependent regions braced for possible layoffs,